Rain whispered against the cracked window panes, slipping down in silver lines that blurred the fields beyond. The Miller farm looked tired in the storm, like it had given up waiting for sunlight that never came. Inside, Ella Miller stood by the window, clutching the letter she had read so many times the words had begun to blur. Foreclosure notice. Her fingers were cold around the paper, though the little fire in the hearth still burned low. She had thought she could fight this, that if she worked hard enough, if she sold eggs in town and mended clothes and took in washing, maybe the bank would show mercy. But mercy wasn't something the world seemed to have for poor girls anymore. The floor creaked as she turned, her boots scuffing against the worn boards. Everything in the house was her father's doing, the table he built with his hands, the patched chair that had once been her mother's. The smell of wood smoke and rain hung in the air, comforting and cruel all at once. It was all she had left of them. To lose this place would be to lose them again, forever. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. "Please, God," she whispered into the stillness, "just let me keep this home." But the only answer came in the low growl of thunder beyond the hills. When the knock came, it startled her so hard she nearly dropped the paper. No one came out this far in the rain. She hesitated, then moved to the door, her heart hammering. The old hinges moaned as she opened it. And there he was. Caleb Weston. He stood tall beneath the sagging porch roof, rain dripping from the brim of his dark hat, his coat gleaming wet under the gray sky. He looked like a man carved out of the very earth. Broad shoulders, square jaw, eyes the color of weathered steel. There was no cruelty in his face, but no softness either. He was the kind of man who made decisions that stayed made. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice low, steady, touched with the accent of the plains. "I came about the land." Her throat closed. "Please," she said before she could stop herself. "Please don't take it." He looked at her for a long moment, rain pattering on his hat brim. His eyes flicked past her to the dim room beyond, the cracked walls, the small fire, the traces of a life hanging on by threads. "I figured you might say that," he murmured. "Mind if I step in? We can talk where it's dry." She stepped aside, trembling as he entered. His boots left wet marks on the floor, but she didn't care. She was too aware of how large he seemed in her tiny home, how he filled the space with quiet authority. He removed his hat and held it in one hand, glancing around. "You've kept this place better than I expected," he said after a moment. Most would have walked away long before now. "I couldn't," she whispered. "My father built it. It's all I have." He nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. "You're a loyal daughter. That's clear." Then, with the same calm tone, he added, "But the law's the law. The bank sold the land. I bought it fair." The words hit like a knife. She'd known it, but hearing it from his mouth made it real. "Can't you give me time?" she pleaded. "Just until harvest?" "I'll pay you rent. Rent won't fix the debt," he said softly. "And the land's already deeded." Tears stung her eyes, hot and helpless. "Please, Mr. Weston," she said, voice breaking. "I'll work for you. I'll clean, cook, anything. Don't make me leave my home." He was silent for a long while. Only the fire crackled between them and the rain outside. He didn't look like a cruel man, but he didn't look like one easily swayed either. Then his gaze softened slightly and he sighed, setting his hat on the table. "You'd really do anything to stay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Anything. I don't have anywhere else to go." He studied her face as if he were trying to decide something that might change both their lives. Finally, he stepped closer. The air between them shifted. He smelled faintly of leather and rain, and his voice was deep when he spoke again. "I don't need a maid," he said. "I don't need a cook. What I need is a wife." Ella froze. For a moment she thought she hadn't heard right. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "A wife?" He nodded, eyes steady on hers. "I've got more land than I can manage, a house too quiet, and no one to share it with. I don't want a stranger from the city or some girl looking for my money. I need someone honest, someone who knows how to work and stand their ground." His gaze didn't waver. "You've already proven that." Her heart thundered in her chest. "You mean, if I marry you, you'll let me stay?" "You marry me," he said firmly, "and this place is yours. Ours. I'll put your name beside mine on the deed. You'll never have to beg to keep it again." She stared at him, every thought spinning out of control. It wasn't what she had imagined marriage to be. There was no courtship, no tenderness, just a proposition born of necessity. And yet, beneath the hard edges of his voice, there was something else. A quiet respect, maybe even a kind of mercy. Her breath came unsteady. Why me? He shrugged slightly. Because I don't want to own land that breaks the heart of a good woman. And because you're the only one who's looked me in the eye since I came to town. The fire crackled louder, filling the silence that followed. She could hear the rain easing outside, the wind softening. The world seemed to pause. I can't promise to love you, she said finally, her voice shaking. Not right away. He nodded once. I'm not asking for that. Just your word. I'll give you mine in return. His words hung heavy in the air, and she thought of her father, how he used to say that a man's word was as good as his soul. Caleb Weston didn't seem like a man who broke his. She looked around the little house, the fading curtains, the table her father had carved, the memories in every shadow. If she walked away now, it would all vanish. Her chest ached. All right, she whispered. I'll do it. He didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. A kind of relief, maybe gratitude. He reached for his hat, placed it back on his head, and tipped it slightly toward her. Tomorrow morning, then. I'll come for you, and we'll ride into town. She nodded faintly, unable to find words. When he left, the door closed gently behind him, and the rain began again, softer this time, like a lullaby. Ella sank into her father's old chair, the letter still clutched in her hand. The firelight flickered across her face, catching the tear tracks on her cheeks. She had saved her home. But as she stared into the flames, the weight of what she had agreed to settled deep in her chest. She was no longer just Ella Miller, the farmer's daughter. By tomorrow, she would belong to a man she barely knew, a man who owned everything she'd ever loved. And somewhere inside her, amid the fear and uncertainty, a small, fragile hope began to bloom. The morning broke with a fragile stillness, a hush that came after a long night of rain. Mist clung to the fields, soft and silver, wrapping the world in quiet. Ella stood at her window, her breath fogging the glass, watching the dawn rise over the hills. Her dress hung neatly on the back of a chair, the cream one with blue flowers, the nicest she owned. She had brushed her hair until it shone, tied it back with a faded ribbon, and tried not to think about what the day meant. In a few hours, she would no longer be Ella Miller. A horse's distant gallop carried through the mist. Her heart jumped. She leaned closer to the window, her pulse quickening. Out of the haze came Caleb Weston, astride a tall chestnut stallion, his dark coat drying in the wind, his posture straight and sure. He looked like a man who had always known exactly where he was going. Ella smoothed her skirt, trying to still the trembling in her hands. When he reached the gate, he dismounted with an easy grace, his boots landing solidly on the damp earth. He tipped his hat to her, his eyes steady. "Mornin', Miss Miller." She swallowed hard. "Morning, Mr. Weston. You ready?" Her fingers twisted together. "As I'll ever be." He gave a quiet nod, then offered his hand. She hesitated before taking it, her small fingers resting uncertainly in his gloved palm. His grip was firm, reassuring, not possessive. He helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her thin dress. The road to town stretched ahead, still damp from the night storm. The sun began to break through the fog, gilding the fields in soft gold. Neither of them spoke much. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of hooves on the earth and the soft rustle of the wind. When they reached the small town, life was already stirring, the blacksmith hammering, a shopkeeper sweeping his stoop, a dog barking lazily by the post office. People turned to look when they saw them ride in together. Whispers followed them like dust in the air. Caleb ignored it all, dismounting and tying the reins to the hitching post. He offered Ella his hand again, helping her down. "Don't mind the talk," he murmured. "They've nothing better to do." She managed a faint smile. "I've lived in this town all my life. I'm used to talk." Inside the courthouse, the air was cool and still. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when Caleb spoke. "We're here to be wed," he said simply. The clerk blinked, surprised, then nodded and began pulling out papers. Ella's hand shook as she signed her name, Ella Miller, for the last time. The clerk handed Caleb the pen, and he wrote his name in firm, steady letters, Caleb Weston. The clerk mumbled something about witnesses, fetched a deputy and a woman from the office next door, and within minutes, the vows were spoken, simple and solemn. When the clerk declared them husband and wife, Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of warmth in his eyes. He tipped his hat slightly. "Mrs. Weston." Her throat tightened. "I suppose I am." They stepped back into the sunlight, and the sound of the town swelled around them again. But everything felt distant, muffled. She was married now. It didn't feel real. Not yet. The ride back was quieter than before. The wind tugged at her hair, and once, when she shifted in the saddle, Caleb said softly, "You all right?" She nodded without turning. "Just thinking." He said nothing more. When they reached his ranch, the sheer size of it took her breath away. Rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with cattle grazing lazily under the sun. The main house stood tall and white, its porch wide and welcoming, the windows gleaming in the light. It looked like something from another world. Caleb dismounted and helped her down once more. "Welcome home," he said quietly. She looked up at the house, at the way the sunlight caught on the porch rail, the smell of fresh hay and warm earth all around, and something inside her cracked. For so long she had fought just to survive, to keep a roof over her head. Now she had one, and yet she didn't know where she belonged. Inside, the house was large and full of light. Wide wooden floors, neatly polished furniture, the faint scent of cedar and soap. A woman, older, with gray in her hair and kind eyes, appeared from the kitchen and smiled softly. "Mr. Weston," she said, "you didn't say you were bringing a wife home today." Caleb gave a brief nod. "Didn't know till last night." The woman chuckled lightly, then turned to Ella. "Well, welcome, dear. I'm Mrs. Carter, the housekeeper. If you need anything, you just ask." "Thank you," Ella said softly, her voice barely audible. Caleb gestured toward the wide staircase. "You can choose any room you like," he said. "Though I'd be honored if you'd share mine. When you're ready." Her cheeks flushed crimson. I'll take one for now, if that's all right." "Of course," he said simply. "There's no rush." She spent the next few days trying to find her place in that vast, quiet house. She helped Mrs. Carter in the kitchen, learned where everything was kept, and took walks across the fields in the evenings when the light turned soft and golden. Caleb was always nearby, never hovering, never demanding. He worked long hours, fixing fences, checking cattle, returning each night with dust on his boots and exhaustion in his eyes. He was kind but distant, like a man still unsure of how to fit someone into his solitude, yet he never once treated her like a burden. When she burned supper on her second night, he ate every bite without complaint. When she asked if she might tend a small patch of garden by the porch, he smiled faintly and said, "It's your home." "Ella, do what you please." Slowly, the tension between them began to soften. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, she found him by the barn, hammer in hand, repairing a broken fence rail. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his skin sun-darkened, his movements steady and sure. She lingered by the fence, watching for a moment before speaking. "You work harder than anyone I've ever seen," she said softly. He looked up, eyes crinkling faintly. "Old habits. I don't like sitting still." She smiled, stepping closer. "You didn't have to take me in, you know. You could have just sent me away." He set down the hammer and leaned against the fence, folding his arms. "Could have. But I didn't want to." "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You barely knew me." His gaze held hers steadily, the sunset painting his face in shades of gold and shadow. "Because when I saw you standing there in that little house, holding your ground against the whole world, I saw someone I respected, someone worth standing beside." Her throat tightened. "You respected me enough to marry me?" He gave a small, quiet smile. "That, and I reckon I was lonely. I didn't realize how much till you walked into my life." For a long moment, neither spoke. The crickets had begun to sing, and the smell of rain still lingered faintly on the wind. Ella stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Caleb," she whispered, "I don't know what kind of wife I'll be, but I'll try." He looked at her, and something gentle passed over his face. "You already are." And there, under the deepening sky, the poor girl who had once begged to keep her home realized she had found something far richer than land or safety. She had found a man who saw her, not as a burden, not as a deal to be made, but as a woman worth choosing. As the stars began to bloom above the ranch, she knew her father's words had been right all along. A man's word was worth more than gold. And Caleb Weston's promise had given her not just a home, but a beginning she never expected to find.